Hello, and welcome to another edition of Academic Matters. I'm Joe Marbach, the Provost at Lasalle University. In this first segment, I'm joined by Dr. Lyman Stebbins, who's an assistant professor in the Department of History. Lyman, welcome.
Thank you, Joe. It's a great pleasure to be here.
It's a great pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
For the audience at home, could you tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to LaSalle and your experience over the past, now what's your fourth year?
Yes, I did an undergraduate degree in Dallas, Texas, at the University of Dallas, and there I learned a little bit about liberal arts education, which makes LaSalle a very ideal fit for me. And I did my graduate work at the University of Chicago, a PhD in history. And I was hired here in 2011, and I was hired actually to sort of teach two things, both European history and Middle Eastern history, a kind of a both and. And that was well suited for me because that was precisely what my training had been in graduate school. I studied the British Empire on the one hand and British history generally. And on the other hand, I study Middle Eastern history, and then I bring them together through a research project based on British imperial relations with Iran about 100 years ago.
Wow, and it must be really timely then. To what extent are we learning from history, or can we learn from history, and how do you incorporate that into the classroom?
Well, I think this is critical to teaching history, is to convince students that the past in some sense is significant to us in the present. And clearly with events happening in the Middle East today, I think what you're seeing in many ways is a revision or the consequences of certainly British relationships with the Middle East. I mean, if you look at something like ISIS or the Islamic State, their express ideology is to build a new state that joins Syria together with Iraq and to erase the very imperial borders that Britain drew on the map with French assistance 100 years ago. So, I mean, the connections between the past and the present are essential for understanding where we are.
So there would be more of a concept of a united Arabia that existed 300 years ago,
well,
or more.
Yeah, there would be this idea that the Sunni populations that are on both sides of these, what they would consider to be an arbitrary Iraq-Syrian border, a Sunni Arab population should be joined together. Now, clearly their position with regard to what that state should look like with their Islamic ideology or Islamist ideology, however you want to frame it, is not a function of map drawing by empires, but the geography of their state is, and that's what's interesting.
Oh, okay. So we're really learning from the past. It's
Yeah.
very instructive into
Absolutely.
Now, this may be outside your field a little bit, Lyman, but what should policymakers know, or what is it that our students know that policymakers don't, that we could help inform them?
Well, that's a great question, and when I try to encourage students to study history, one of the arguments is that you can't figure out the solutions to a contemporary problem without the historical background. So I teach the modern Middle East here at LaSalle. I also teach classes on empires and global history, and many of the themes, the same themes run through both. And our students at LaSalle, when they study the modern Middle East, they understand that the modern Middle East is actually older than 1970 or 1918, that in fact, if we want to understand the shape and contours of the modern Middle East, we need to go back to at least the 18th century and trace how the Ottoman Empire in the 19th century reformed and tried to survive in the Age of High Empire, and then eventually how it broke apart in World War I, or I should say was broken apart by the Allies. And so this sets up the background for understanding the shape of the Middle East and many of its current tensions and problems.
So the traditions of colonialism,
Absolutely.
which to some extent predate the British Empire, but then are also reflected in policies followed by the British Empire.
Right, and the Ottoman Empire was an empire too, and its failure, its breakup, and its replacement by other kinds of states and networks is part of it. So empires, both British and Ottoman, and French and Russian, are part of the story.
What's the reaction of students as you present this to them? Do the light bulbs go off in their minds, or is it foreign to where they've been?
I think so, actually. In the Middle East course this year, I started with a new approach. Instead of sort of starting traditionally at the beginning, I actually, on the first day, I said, let's go through what's happening today in the Middle East. What kinds of issues, and we went to Egypt, and we went to Israel and the Palestinians, we went to the Iran situation with regard to the revolution, Iraq. We just sort of went around the map, and we sort of said, here's what's going on. And then we did the class, And we ended with that same conversation, and we sort of tracked, even in the space of 3 months, what had changed on the ground now, and also how their interpretation of those events had been informed by what we'd studied in class.
Okay, so it was a nice circle.
Yeah, that was a kind of recursive pedagogy, if you like.
Yeah, that's great. Well, in addition to what you've been doing in the classroom, I know you're doing research and you're in the process of writing a book. Tell us a little bit about that research.
Well, the book sort of drills down on some of these themes. The book is a research project about Britain's relationship with Iran, particularly southern Iran, from about 1890 to about 1921, during these critical years in the making of the modern Middle East. The British never ruled Iran explicitly. They never raised the flag in any kind of permanent way. But they had so much influence there that historians have always sort of thought about it as a kind of case of empire. And the British were interested in Iran because the British already had an empire in India. And they were, most empires are always worried about strategic protection. Mm-hmm. And strategic protection for the British meant influence in Iran so as to keep the Russians out. And what my research does is it takes that rather well-known trope and drills down into the local level about how that played itself out in local politics between tribal leaders or local muckety-mucks, landowning elites, and the British intelligence networks operating out of India.
Does that eventually lead to the establishment of the Shah or a kingdom in Iran?
Well, that's a good question. The kingship in Iran is very old. It goes back to antiquity. There, however, after the Islamic conquest, kingship was sort of dormant in Iran up until about 1500. And then a series of dynasties came into play, Safavids, Qajars, and Pahlavis. The Pahlavis, the last family, came to power in 1920 in a coup d'etat in 1921. They had a vexed relationship with the British and then clearly with the Americans, which culminated in the Iranian Revolution.
Right, and that's where we those of us who know a little bit of more modern history and the fall of the Shah and what's led to modern-day Iran traces back to, I guess,
Absolutely.
An anti-Western attitude, I guess, that is pervasive in Iran.
Yes, well, Iran has this sort of love and hate relationship with the West. On the one hand, there's a tremendous interest in the West and interest in European and American ideas and culture. There was the Happy video in Tehran that was quite the song that's on our Lasalle. There was a Tehran version of that, and the young people who did it were arrested. So maybe that incident shows you both the love and perhaps the fear of something like a music video, right? I went to Iran about 10 years ago, and I went to, you can drive past the old American embassy, which is now a regime institution. I went inside the British embassy, which was a center point of this relationship. And I remember reading in graffiti on the wall, Istiqlal, independence, was written on graffiti on the British embassy wall. So there is this consciousness. They have a consciousness. I think that's important too. As Americans, we need to understand that other people have a sense of history, and we need to understand their sense of history in order to understand what's at stake.
Yeah. Which leads me to my next question about doing research on this project. So you're obviously have access to British documents.
Certainly, yeah.
And was this trip 10 years ago to access Iranian documents, or?
Yeah, it was to work on my Persian, which is a work in progress, as you can imagine, but I did access some Iranian archives, and while British documents, which I gather in London typically, are the main body of evidence, because it's a study of British policy, there are nonetheless peppered in Iranian footnotes from things that I gathered there or things that I've gathered since then that are available in this country.
Okay. You mentioned London, and one of the areas that we take special pride in at LaSalle is our engaged learning practices, and among them include travel studies. And you're in the process of, I guess, team teaching a class, or will be in the spring, that will take students to London. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, thank you. That's a very exciting prospect. Professor James Jessen of the English department is co-teaching this class with me, and we are taking students to London for spring break. And it's a class on London as a kind of global city, and city as classroom and globalization are clearly important themes in our education here at LaSalle, and no better place to study that than London. I mean, London was connected with the British Empire, the making of the British Empire, a global phenomenon, capitalism and industrialism and parliamentary democracy and reform. And so students will get a chance on the ground in London and with a range of primary sources to engage with those primary sources in the classroom and then engage with the City of London on foot, so to speak, and hopefully learn in both those modes more about how we sort of have come together as a global community, or not.
What kinds of places are they going? This is not just a tour. They're not just going to tour, but you said they're going to engage in primary resources, primary documents,
right,
and kind of get a feel of the times in which these documents are written and the global realities, the environment in which they're written in. Where are you going, I guess?
Well, I mean, one of the things we want them to do is to actually use the city as a primary source. So you select something of, let's say you're studying industrial working conditions, and you read some Dickens for the lit part, and then you read some Factory Acts or Marx for the history part. And then you go in London, and maybe you're just riding the subway, and you think about, how was this subway built hundreds of feet underground? And then you learn about Irish labor, or you learn about working conditions and labor unions and all of those things. So there's a real opportunity there to get your hands dirty, so to speak, in some of these things. So that's one example. But of course, for history sites, I mean, London is filled with fabulous historical sites, Westminster Abbey or St. Paul's Cathedral, or there's the Imperial War Museum has a 100-year anniversary of the beginnings of World War I exhibit going on, which we're going to take students to. Here we are 100 years later,
sure.
And that conflict shocked and rocked the 20th century. So we'll get to examine those primary sources there as well.
Yeah, what a great timing too,
Yeah.
with a lot of the recognition of the 100th anniversary of the outset of World War I. So students will be, I guess, really experiencing history from a really different perspective, from that British perspective of they were so engaged in that war.
And when the British fought World War I, they fought it as an empire. They had literally like 1 million Indian soldiers fighting all over the world in places like Iraq, in places like the Western Front. So the breakup of the Ottoman Empire is something which is accomplished by Indian and Australian soldiers fighting under the British flag, right? I mean, that's World War I.
And that's truly a world war.
Yeah, it really is. It really is.
Lyman, we're out of time, but it's gone quickly. I appreciate you stopping by and telling us about what you've been doing in the classroom and what you'll be doing outside the classroom.
Well, it's a great pleasure. Thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Okay.
All right.
My guest has been Dr. Lyman Stebbins, who is an assistant professor in the history department here at Lasalle University. In our next segment, I'll be joined by I'm having a blank, Dr. Donna Tomlinson, who's in our psychology department here at the university. Please come back. Good to see you, Donna.
Are you tired of your boring life? Nothing exciting going on anymore? Sick of only doing what you have to do? Tired of the mundane routine? Well, hold up. We have the cure for you. That's right, Lasalle TV. With sports, news, game shows, and more, you'll be sure to find exactly what you've been needing. Lasalle TV. You know you watch.
There's something for everyone at Lasalle TV. I watch Lasalle TV.
I watch Lasalle TV.
The baseball team watches LaSalle TV.
I watch LaSalle TV.
I watch LaSalle TV.
Miro Televisión de LaSalle.
Vedo io la televisione LaSalle.
Я дивлюсь ласальську телевізію і дуже вона мене цікавить.
我睇電視.
And you can too. Follow us, like us, and watch us on LaSalle TV.
From our campus to the city of Philadelphia. Tune in and watch, because we know you will love Lasalle TV.
Welcome back to Academic Matters. I'm Joe Marbach, the Provost at Lasalle University. In this segment, I'm joined by Dr. Donna Tomlinson, who is the Director of the Counseling and Family Therapy Master's Programs here at LaSalle. Donna, welcome to the program.
Thank you. I appreciate you inviting me.
No, it's a pleasure, and especially to talk about one of our most successful programs on campus, certainly our largest graduate program, the Counsel and Family Therapy Programs. Before we talk about that, though, tell me a little bit about your history and background and how you ended up here at LaSalle.
Okay. Well, I'm actually a LaSalle alum. So I got my master's degree at LaSalle, and my master's was in counseling and marriage and family therapy. And then after graduating, I worked in the field, and then I began a private practice. And about 5 years later, I came back and got my doctorate. And in getting my doctorate, I still was, working in my private practice, doing my doctorate degree. And once I graduated, I realized I wanted to add something besides the clinical. So I decided to check into teaching. And I taught in our undergraduate and our graduate program. But what happened was the graduate program really pulled me in two ways. One, by virtue of me, because I really had an interest in training young therapists, young in the field therapists. And second, it was a way of giving back. So I started to get invited into committees. So before I knew it, I was on one committee and then another committee, and then I got more and more involved, and then I became the director of the Marriage and Family Therapy Program, and now I'm the director of the entire program.
Okay. So marriage and family therapy is one component of the larger counseling and family therapy. Explain to the folks at home what that means, what it entails in these various programs that we have, and I think also how important that is to our mission as a Catholic, but also a LaSallian university.
Well, actually, I think our program, especially our professional clinical counseling and our marriage and family therapy programs, tie right into the LaSallian mission. Certainly our industrial organization program also does, but the marriage and family therapy and professional counselors, as part of their training, they do a 1 calendar year internship. And that internship is that they go out into the field. They are actually the counselor or the marriage and family therapist in community mental health. So they, for 1 year, are offering their services as a clinician. Obviously, they're getting trained. And as much as we do an excellent job of training our students, the clients are their best teachers. So they really learn from going out into the field and working with the clients. But this is out in the community, and so they're helping families, they're helping individuals, they're helping children, they're helping adolescents, and it ties directly into the LaSallian mission.
So it's that practical element of the LaSallian education, but also a commitment to the community that's really at the heart of it. What are some of the sites that our students are being placed in?
Well, we have lots of sites in Philadelphia. One that comes to mind immediately is Center for Family and Relationships. Currently, the director of the program is a LaSalle alum. We have probably 3 or 4 alums working there, and we probably have 4 or 5 interns there.
Okay.
Cura is another, and Cura has a site here next to the Ladder Center. So
right here on campus.
There, yes. Lenape Valley Foundation, which is in Doylestown, so we go out into the suburbs. Crozier Medical Center in New Jersey. We have Penn Foundation in Sellersville, Pennsylvania. So we have about 100 sites that we have contracts with, and the contract basically says that they are willing to have our interns come in and provide supervision and provide everything that they need as a upcoming clinician. And they help with the training, and then our students are there for a year. So everyone benefits. The clients benefit, the student benefits, and the site benefits.
Yeah, so they get that their hands dirty, really,
Yes,
in that sense,
absolutely.
but in a protected type of environment with
Correct.
supervision, and it's one-to-one supervision in most cases.
They have to have
So-
1 hour of individual supervision each week throughout the year. And then the other thing that the students do, and this is the course that I teach, the students attend professional seminar, which is the class that goes along with the internship. And that's another way for us to hold them up. So you have the site holding them up by the virtue of the supervision. You have LaSalle holding them up because we are aware of everything that they're doing. But then they're in class, and now they have not only their advisor, but they have one of the professors helping them and guiding them through the year. So the student attends this class once a week for the year, and they present their cases, and they get to learn from everyone else as well. So everyone gets to see the cases of each other.
Okay, so you've got students learning from one another, learning
Yes.
from the professor, and then learning from the practitioner.
Correct.
And all coming together.
And all comes together, yeah.
I mentioned it's our largest program, I guess, or among, as a suite, it's our largest program. How many students are in the program now?
I would say between 385 and 400 students we have right now. Yeah.
Is there, that sounds like a very large number. Is there that need in the community? Are we recognizing the need for counseling services more so than we've had in the past?
The Board of Labor Statistics has recently published that marriage and family therapists, they expect the opportunities for employment to go up by 41% between now and 2020.
Wow.
And for professional counselors, for it to go up by 36%. So the jobs are out there, the need is out there. I think what's happening is we're understanding mental health better, we're understanding how valuable it is, the stigma is much less than it used to be. People are recognizing that, in a sense, I think it's wise for everyone to have a mental health clinician that they can go to. It's not just about doing therapy in the midst of a crisis. It's about paying attention to your mental well-being throughout your lifespan. And many times clients will go into therapy and complete their therapy and are in a good place, but then life happens. And it could be 5 years later, 10 years later, they're in a new stage of life where the children have grown or a crisis has occurred and they come back. So it's something that people do consistently throughout their life, which I think helps everyone to keep their mental stability at its peak.
Yeah, it sounds like a safe harbor as one's going through life. Now, our students, after they've gone through the program, and it's a couple years in the classroom, and then it's a full year in service, what's the next step? They have to go for licensure, and what does that involve?
Well, in Pennsylvania, it involves that after graduation, excuse me, the graduate will work in the field. Many of our students get hired where they did their internship, and they'll work in the field. And in Pennsylvania, they have to have 3,000 hours before they can even apply for the license. So, and they can't work for less than 2 years. So the license is the highest credential that you get, and our program is geared towards that. I mean, the idea of us accepting students in is we want them to become licensed clinicians. So that's what we're aiming for.
Okay.
So they work for 2 years or more, but they have up to 6 years to get their hours. And then they apply for a license, and then they're licensed, and they then turn around and sometimes they're supervising our students.
Okay. Now, is that license, is that a test, a written test they take, or is it they're evaluated based on their portfolio that they're presenting to the state board?
Well, it's both. They have to take a written test. They have to have 3,000 clinical hours. Those hours have to be supervised. So they have to have a seasoned clinician to sign off and say, yes, this person has done this work and they've done it well. And then the state will assign them a license.
Okay.
After they've met the criteria.
And now we offer the program at main campus, but also at some of our satellite campuses. And you've moved it into a more of an executive format or weekend format. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, you know, we have the 3 campuses, Maine, Bucks, and Montgomery County. At the Montgomery County campus in Plymouth Meeting is where we offer the accelerated program. And it's each course is a Friday night, all day Saturday, all day Sunday for 2 weekends. And then the students are taking 1 course at a time. So it's very intense. It's an intense way to do the work, but it's also real effective because each course has total concentration. So the students are concentrating on that course one at a time. So it really is a nice way to learn it.
Who's attracted to that course? Are these working professionals, returning students, or rather than some that might go straight through?
Probably both. It's the working professional often wants to have something that's convenient, which our program originally was set up that way because many of our students are part-time in the traditional schedule. But the accelerated schedule is certainly for people who are working, or just weekends work better for them, or sometimes they're coming from a distance, so they come in for the course, stay, for the weekend, and then
stay
go
overnight
back home.
or something. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So it has two pieces. It's a convenience, but it also is a effective way to learn. So I think and it's wonderful. The Montgomery campus is a wonderful location for convenience for people coming from lots of areas.
Sure, we're located right off the Turnpike in the Metroplex Center,
Right.
so it's a very convenient site, as you say. Donna, we've got about a minute left. If folks are interested in this program, how would they go about finding out more information?
Well, they certainly can go to our website, and on the website we have the Counseling and Family Therapy website, which they can find by going through the Lasalle
So it would
website.
be lasalle.edu,
Yes,
and then look into graduate programs or into...
And it's right there, yeah,
Okay.
Counseling and Family Therapy. And each program has its own webpage, so they can get lots of information, and the information to contact the office is there. So they certainly could contact me, or they can contact the office, and we have graduate advisors, so we have lots of people ready to help at any time.
And we've got our full-time faculty that are involved, and we also have a very skilled part-time faculty. I guess many of them are our own alums that are part of this.
Yes.
So it's really a close-knit community in a real sense.
Yes. And what happens is networking begins once our graduates become alums, and then they stay in touch with each other, and that's needed in this field. You need to have self-care. When you're taking care of others, you have to make sure you have self-care as well.
Okay. Well, thank you, Donna.
Thank you.
My guest has been Dr. Donna Tomlinson, who's the director of the Counseling and Family Therapy programs here at LaSalle University. Once again, my name is Joe Marbach. I'm the provost at LaSalle. Thanks for watching.